Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. I want to carry forward a bit on that theme that we held during the meditation. This idea that together we have this opportunity to really create something, and most importantly, a container within which we can all practice. So as was mentioned earlier, Ayyā Cittānandā and I just finished teaching a retreat at Cloud Mountain for 2 weeks. And it was really wonderful. We've done this for a few years, and this time people seemed to go particularly deep in their practice, and the things they were sharing with us when we would meet with them, and just the sense of the stillness and energy in the hall. And it was a wonderful reminder that human beings have this amazing ability when we come together to create a kind of energy field with our practice and really support each other in deepening. And it's helpful to consider the things that the Buddha said about community. It was a really great time at Cloud Mountain. During this recent retreat for a couple weeks, of how wonderfully deep people were able to go into their practice, and to be able to have the container of the group practicing together. And of course, we have been really filled with joy as we watch this community of Clear Mountain coming together and developing, and seeing how you are all supporting each other and in this effort.
So the Buddha talked about the qualities of a harmonious community, or the things that we can do as individuals to cultivate the characteristics that really make it possible to have a strong, harmonious, effective community. And you may have heard of these already, but I don't know. We'll try to take them a little bit deeper than maybe we've done in the past. The first three things actually are loving kindness, acts of loving kindness by body, speech, and mind. And when we really pay attention to that and live according to that kind of motto or value, we really can deepen our understanding of the people around us and also of ourselves. We can really learn how to work with those tendencies to be irritable or judgmental. And often we direct that at ourselves as much as at anyone else. And to think in terms of, how do I approach this with loving kindness? And it starts, of course, in the mind. And with these qualities of this value of treating one another with those actions by body, speech, and mind with loving kindness is a huge start. But also, what's crucial is all keeping precepts. And so the virtue, the trust that we can have for one another in a community where we're all dedicated to keeping precepts. 5 precepts. On this retreat, a very shocking number of people kept 8 precepts. It was really beautiful to see. It was optional. People could make the choice. They could even decide to opt in or out on a daily basis if they wanted to, which is helpful because then people don't feel like they're signing up for something that they really have to follow through on if it's not working for them. And it was amazing how many people were able to really pick that up and make use of it. So virtue, kindness, and then generosity, sharing with one another, being generous in the way we treat each other, sharing what we have. It's beautiful, that kind of open-heartedness. And of course, sharing has various modes. Giving is one thing, material giving is one thing, but kind words, helping each other out, treating people with respect. We had one person who is wheelchair bound on the retreat. Today, when we all started talking again, she shared that how amazing it was for her that people were so kind to her, so thoughtful, that in her world she doesn't find that very often. And it meant so much to her. And to recognize that all of these things play a big part in our community developing this kind of beautiful field of safety and warmth and support and honesty. So, virtue, precepts, and one of the Buddha said the main thing, the ridgepole of the building, the part that holds it all together, is that we share the same goal, the same emancipating view. And in a lot of Buddhist communities, they don't talk very much about nibbana and awakening, but when you have monastic teachers, that's often something you'll hear. And that's another very, very, very important part, of course, the community, the good teachers that you have here. And when the Buddha talked about how to find a teacher, he talked about really observing them to see if they would in any way be overcome by greed, hatred, or delusion in a way that they would lead people the wrong way or kind of exaggerate what they know or say they have something they don't have in terms of their spiritual development, that kind of thing. The Buddha said you need to really pay attention and observe them. It's one of the lovely things about having these monks as teachers. You can really see how they live their life. And you can also have confidence that they're living their life as monastics within a larger community of monastics. So there's this very broad safety net where you can really trust that there's support for living the holy life in a good way. And then, of course, the availability of the teachers. this is also huge, that they're here to support you. You can come to them, you can talk to them, and they can help you. This is something that is, the real guidance for the community. So beautiful. So we, as the sort of sisters here, loving and really respecting and being filled with joy for the development of this clear mountain community it's really such an honor to be associated with you all. And we really want to encourage that ongoing development, coming together, making this a safe space for any sincere practitioner, regardless of whatever characteristics the world might judge us on. So we really want to encourage you all and offer our support to the degree we can, whenever it's needed. And I really appreciate your patience with the sound quality. And I hope you take good care.
Checking. Checking, Seth. Checking. Budo. Checking now. Okay. Thank you, Ayyā. We now have a chance for Q&A and discussion. So if people would like to raise your hand, and if you're on Zoom, you can raise your electronic hand or type something into chat, and we'll call on you. YouTube, you can type into the comments. And it's just a great opportunity to ask the whole monastic community anything that comes to mind. And Ajahn Kovelo and I will be helping out a little bit. The Ayya's just came from a long retreat, so. And if a mindful mic runner could take this mic, and we will pass this guy around. Great.
Thank you, Ayyā. My name is Sam. Thinking in a monastic community, or where people are keeping precepts in that factor, I think eventually someone might accidentally or intentionally break one, potentially. So I know in our community, Ajahn Nispo's talked about confessions as a means of maintaining harmony, but I was wondering if you could speak to, in that case, unless it's like a serious deal precept that's broken. Thank you.
Thank you for that question, because certainly that happens because we're all learning and we make mistakes and have our defilements and all of that. And it's wonderful how the Buddha was all about rehabilitation and how we can make mistakes, learn from it, break precepts if, under certain circumstances. And I really appreciate how you have, if that's what's going on is still, you have like confession partners maybe, or whatever, what do you call them?
confession confidants. Yeah, that you can talk to another person. This is what we do in the monastic life. You can talk to your spiritual friend about what happened, and the formula, as many of you know, goes, okay, do you see? And you say, you see, and do you recommit? Yes, I recommit, and you clear the slate. And of course, the whole thing is about learning. It's about first acknowledging what happened, what you did, learning from it, forgiving yourself, and going on and making that change. I mean, a lot of what we learn comes from the missteps we take, and so I really, the Buddha over and over again in the suttas says, it's acknowledging what happened, what you've done, or the view you've held that was wrong, or whatever, and that you acknowledge that, and you ask, to have that acknowledged by another person, and then change. It's about changing. We all have to change if you're going to get enlightened. You're not going to be the same way you are now. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see people working at, letting go of their aversion, letting go of their anger, and it's not an easy thing to do. These are often deep habits that we have to change. And when we're using precepts as the baseline, and we are dealing with how do I keep these in, a real way, it's incredibly fruitful. Also, when we were doing the retreat, we were doing the evening chanting, where you do the part where you say something like, whatever I've done, how's it go? By body, speech, or mind, for whatever wrong actions towards the Buddha, and then towards the Dhamma, towards the Sangha. It's really about clearing whatever happened during that day. It's to clear the slate and acknowledge whatever there has been and go on without regret. And it's wonderful to live without regret.
You talk about safety, and I'm wondering what I can do to promote a sense of safety internally in situations where I don't feel safe.
A lot of it has to do with wisdom and boundaries. So we have to look at why I don't feel safe. Do I not feel safe because I can't trust the people I'm around to be keeping precepts? Or do I feel unsafe because I have this history where things haven't been safe and I haven't been able to kind of work through that yet? And I'm not asking, obviously, but taking stock of where that feeling, that lack of safety comes from. If we're in a position where we can't really feel safe because it's not safe, then we can hopefully make changes in our life to be with people who are trustworthy. And when we can't do that, at least develop clear boundaries that we then really use. Like, what am I going to do if X happens to keep myself safe? So I don't know if that touches the experience you're having, because like I said, sometimes our feeling unsafe is it's something that's developed out of our experience in the past and our conditioning. And then what we can do is remind ourselves repeatedly that we are in a community that's safe, that's
trustworthy because people are keeping precepts. Sometimes we have fear, and we can do what the Buddha did before he was enlightened, when he was experiencing fear, and remind ourselves of our own good qualities. Remind yourself of your own virtue. Remind yourself of your own generosity. Remind yourself of your own wisdom. And when we do that, we can start to rely on karma, rely on the good karma that we're making. That's a concept that's a little foreign at first, because I don't know about any of you, but when I used to think about karma, I was going, oh no, like it's gonna come for me. That was the focus. But there is this lovely passage in this book, or it's right in the intro to this book, by Upasika Kinyanyon. I think it was, I don't know, remember which one. I'm just like, but it's where she talks about moving with her aunt and uncle to this abandoned monastery in Thailand and practicing. And she said at first she was afraid. I think it was of ghosts and people. But then she started relying on good karma. Like she learned she could trust the karma of what she was doing. So oftentimes we feel we don't acknowledge our own goodness, and we don't remind ourselves of our own goodness. And we don't, and if we do, we can start to trust our own karma. And that can really help build a sense of inner safety.
Thank you. I'm Carol. Thank you. I'm still learning all the numbers, so I need a review of what the 8 precepts are. And then if you could also say which ones seem to be the harder ones to keep. Thank you.
So the first ones are close to the 5, avoiding killing, avoiding stealing. Instead of avoiding sexual misconduct, it's avoiding all kinds of sexual activity, avoiding lying, and avoiding taking intoxicating drink or drugs which lead to carelessness. And then the 3 that get added on are really training precepts. They're not moral precepts the way the first 4 are. And of course the 5th one, keeping us safe from breaking those 4. But they're about mindfulness and restriction on eating. So eating in the morning and not later in the day. Sleeping, not indulging in sleep. Lying on a higher luxurious sleeping place is often the way it's described. And letting go of entertainment, beautification, and adornment. So in keeping those for a long time, I realized that these are often some of the ways that we comfort ourselves when we don't feel comfortable. So if we're dealing with pain internally, psychologically, if we're dealing with feeling sad or afraid or whatever it may be, we'll often eat or sleep or go shopping, have sex, entertainment to just like distract ourselves. And by keeping those training precepts, we really are much more likely to look at what we're feeling and why and work with it and to work through it. So that's what I really see as a lot of the value of those 8 precepts.
So when you're keeping the 8 precepts, like this group in this retreats situation, they're really working with all these thoughts of wanting food when they're not supposed to have food, of, maybe judging someone else for what they're doing, whether they're doing the right thing or not, and all this kind of stuff. And they're mature enough, these folks, in their practice to not get carried away with that, but to actually use it as a way to understand their own mind and practice really being present with what they feel, working it through. So the one that's hard, the ones that are hard to keep are the ones that kind of dig at our own habits. It could be different for different people.
Monastics. We come from another Buddhist tradition, so it's very much an honor to sit here with all these great practitioners this evening, because we haven't been around such great meditators before for a long time. We actually came here tonight to see Ajahn Pasano, so we got here late due to traffic. So my apologies if you already addressed that. But maybe you did. But I don't know who we have the honor of sitting before all of you are, and I thought I'd say something if that's okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Lumpur Pasano isn't. He's kind of conserving his energy. He just flew in yesterday, so we're not wanting to push him too much. We've got things pretty much scheduled for him every morning and most evenings for the next couple days. So, thought to. Yep, yeah. If you look at the website, there's a schedule for the next couple days. But this is Ayyā Santussikā, Ayyā Cittānandā, and Anagarika Sarana from Karuna Buddhist Vihāra. Yeah, welcome.
And Lumpur Pasano, he just had COVID, so he's recovering from that. That's the reason, pretty much. He's more tired. And this is Ajahn Kovilo, and I'm Ajahn Nisapo.
This question is actually from me, Seth, not on behalf of one of the speakers here. I just want to ask, because I have this opportunity to, and I hope it's not, I don't mean it to be a political question, but how can we as a Sangha support more gender equity in monastic communities and in Buddhism in general?
That's a wonderful question. I think letting people know when you see gender discrimination that it matters to you is good. I would definitely continue to visit places where they're still struggling to get over that, and respect the teachers who are so excellent in so many ways, but are still caught up in traditions that are, haven't seen their way through that yet. And so I think the way to help develop that, not just for gender, but for lots of different kinds of discrimination, is to really speak up about it and express how grateful we are when it's not happening, and when Ayyā Cittānandā kind of started this motto at our place: just don't be weird. And it's really wonderful when we visit other monasteries, and it doesn't feel weird. And, you know, I hope you won't mind my sharing this, but just before many of you came and we greeted Ajahn Kovilo and Ajahn Nisabo, and then I said, you know, there's this thing where the bhikkhunis are supposed to always bow to the bhikkhus, right? And they are more senior to us because they've been able to get ordained faster, and there's more options for where to go to do that, and yet it feels a little like if we keep doing that with everybody kind of observing that all the time, it kind of re-cements this gender inequality. And I think so together we are like, yes, we're going to try to model and live something that's a lot less weird.
Okay, I now have a question from actually another person. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's ask that, and then I might have a final follow-up on that last little bit. So
I think this one is simple. So someone is asking for a financial settlement for services rendered upon an agreed upon expectation, a validation of a precept, i.e. taking that which does not belong to me.
So is not following through on a contract of services rendered a breach of the precept? Is that?
It says is asking for a financial settlement for services.
Okay, finish the question.
Is asking for a financial settlement for services rendered up to an agreed upon expectation a violation of precept?
So I'm assuming the services weren't rendered up to expectation and they're asking for a settlement. Is that what legal things mean here? Am I getting that right?
Definitely, I cannot clarify for you.
Is that about right? Is that your understanding of what they're asking?
Not a lawyer, but it does seem like the question is about taking what's not been given and just different perceptions around that. And in the monastic code, we have lots of different case studies that the Buddha gave at the time of the Buddha, different monks. Basically, the suttas, all the discourses are super inspiring. You have monks attaining arhatship and attaining non-return, and then the Vinaya, all the monks' rules, the 6 books of the monks' rules are basically just monks and nuns behaving badly. So, like, basically the worst examples. But yeah, lots of case studies. But those are for monastics. So for lay people, it's surprisingly sparse what is delineated for lay people to keep these precepts. Really, in regards to this taking what's not been given, you've got that phrase to reflect on. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which has not been given. That's a very good translation of a simple term, and it sounds like there's just a difference of understanding. One party believes that what was given was one thing and the other party believes something else. And I don't think it's necessarily unfair to try to come to some kind of understanding about that. So it's definitely not clear, certainly not for both parties, but with a lot of these questions, for lay precepts, you have to use your wisdom faculty and really come to I think meditation is helpful with this because it can help you get out of your own narrative and actually come to a less biased conclusion, hopefully.
Yeah, and I would, I think that's about right. And just adding that in the monastic code, there is a slight distinction made between taking an item and breaking a contract. And if a contract for services rendered fell under an agreement between 2 parties, and one party didn't fulfill their side of the agreement, I think if you work within the social and legal code of that social contract, that it wouldn't be taking what is not given. It's the state, and people have, agreed to a shared social contract. So I wouldn't think that would fall under stealing in that way. But I am not sure on this one either. So, but I think you're safe on that. And to just speak briefly to the supporting gender equity. It's something the tradition is working with, certainly. I think people, it's wise to have patience around it. It's a millennia-old tradition, and there's some holdovers from various cultures and other inheritances, and yet, there is this really beautiful moment we're in where I think we're coming to something quite wholesome and balanced. And initially, I spoke to Ayyā Bodhi when we were starting Clear Mountain and said, look, how can we support the bhikkhunis? She said, look, we don't need your support. It's kind of patronizing. You can be good friends to us. And that's what we're trying to do, is be good friends. And hopefully that is an important part of what we're hoping to do here. So, yeah.
It is a really important question. So I just tell one short story. So just 2 weeks ago, I was visiting my mother in the Bay Area, and the Ayyas actually came to visit. They visited my house, and it was amazing to see. I've been a monk living in monasteries for about 15 years, and my mom has always been a bit, hesitant, always really quite, always at a bit of a remove in any kind of interaction with monastics, and I always thought it was just because her son's doing something weird, and Buddhism is a weird thing, but when the Ayyas came to visit, it was amazing to watch, and it was almost as if it was almost watching a Dharma door open for my mom, just how calm and at ease and almost like relishing the opportunity to be with the Ayyas and myself. And we ended up shelling peas for about an hour, which is amazing. My mom would barely be able to sustain a 3-minute conversation with any of my monk brothers. And this is just to touch on kind of like a blindness. Living in these monasteries, for the most part, they're just don't really have that much interaction with our sisters. So I just found that a really amazing opening. And for me, I hadn't realized that it might not be that my mom is against Buddhism, but just against kind of the exactly what the question is pointing to, this blindness and lack of sensitivity around gendered issues. So just a really beautiful story. I wish we could have had it on film. That would have been nice. Yeah.
I think the cherry on top was when Ayyā Cittānandā hugged her. She can't do that with the monks.
Hi, I'm Grace. I have a question. I've been contemplating feelings a lot more lately, and kind of have this sort of had this realization that I was super disconnected with my body and emotions, and had been denying emotions a lot, especially in the anatta, not self teachings. And so I kind of carried that meditation practice of sort of like, no, don't think, no, like kind of go away, pushing down into my daily life. And so I'm kind of coming back from that after realizing I've done that for a while. So it's tricky to feel like I'm reconnecting with those feelings and with my body. And I'm curious if you have advice or thoughts on how to go about that skillfully and not, I kind of catch myself getting caught in stories again too. So how to balance that listening to emotions and letting them arise and pass away without getting caught in them.
Yeah, the best way is to drop the story as soon as possible and focus on the feeling in the body. And one way you can develop that discipline is to write about it. So you start with one phrase that describes the trigger of this feeling, and then you drop the story. And you start looking at, where is this feeling located in my body? How does it feel? How big is it? What color would it have if it had a color? These kinds of things that you might see in this system that Eugene Gendlin came up with many years ago, focusing, and you can also find it in Feeding Your Demons by Lama Tsultrim Mallione, and just different ways of being with those feelings. But it's really the first three noble truths. And so when we have a feeling, say anger rises, or fear, or sadness, or whatever, it's the thoughts that continue to fuel the feeling. And so when we stop the thoughts about it, and we're really, turning to inquire about how that feeling feels in the body, then we're really using mindfulness in what I think is the most powerful way to use it, because we're really learning how to rewire our own connections between contact, going from contact to feeling to craving in the chain of dependent origination. And so this is the wedge of awareness that you slip in between that feeling arising and taking some kind of action about it. And thought is an action. So when we're thinking, well, how could they say that to me? And I should have said this or that in order to argue my point or whatever. It's all just adding the proliferation. There's a really good description of this process in the Honeyball Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, or sometime I think in Bhante Sujato's translation, he calls it honey cake. And in that one, the Buddha talks about how you have contact and then feeling, but instead of going to craving, he goes to perception. Then you have perception, and he says what you perceive, you think about, so then you have thought. And then you have proliferation of thoughts and identification with it. So we're identifying with this, and that's what really carries us off into misery. There's dukkha there. Whenever we're identifying, it's dukkha. And so the way to interrupt that is right there, right where you're working. And it's really takes some persistence and courage, and it's so beneficial. So be really kind to yourself in this process, and really remind yourself how important this is in order to let go of those long-held patterns that bring so much suffering to us. And when we have patterns on top of these patterns that bring up these feelings that cause us to react in the world, it brings a lot of suffering to the people around us too. And so it's really worthwhile. And when we have a habit of suppressing, we're just driving something deeper that actually will erupt in some weird way to our detriment, whether it's a physical ailment or emotional stress. But when we really are willing to look and not indulge in reacting around it and not push it away, that's when we really make progress. And it's It's progress on the level of our ability to interact socially in a much better way. And it's also on the way to our spiritual awakening.
Hi, my name is Mike. Thank you so much for your talk. And the being supported by a community brings up to me this balance between seclusion. We talked about this a little bit on Saturday at our gathering. The balance between seclusion and community and interaction in that community. You know, because in the Satipatthana Sutta, the first instruction is go find an abandoned hut or the base of a tree and sit and meditate. So if you could share a little bit about that balance, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. You know, it's like just to hold this example of the retreat container where people are quiet, they're not talking to each other, they're often sitting or walking off by themselves in the forest, but they also come together and sit together in the hall. And it's a really interesting kind of blend of that seclusion. So you have your own personal seclusion of, you know, being contained because you're not speaking, and you've got that seclusion off in the forest part of the time, and then you've got this togetherness in a way where this kind of energy builds. And so that's a lovely balance, but it's not the one we usually are able to create in our normal life. And I think I really love that, you know, most of our training for all of us is through the Ajahn Chah tradition, and I love how Ajahn Chah was so community oriented, really saw the value in that, and how there is this balance, at least in the monastic life, that you create by having time to go off by yourself and practice and then back into community. So one question is, I think your question is, how do you make that happen in lay life? And I think it is very important to, you know, have a daily practice, a time when you can go by yourself and turn inwards. And even if there are other people in the house, if you're turning inwards, that's a kind of seclusion. And even when we feel triggered by something and angry, if we turn inwards instead of pushing outwards, that's another kind of seclusion. It's actually a kind of renunciation. You're renouncing following the habit of snapping back at the other person or doing something that adds to the conflict. So renunciation is really when we hold back from doing something that we've decided is something we want to learn not to do, or at least for some period of time. And having a period of time is good. And then, you know, staying with it and learning that we can choose to not follow the usual track. So this, you know, when we're working with our feelings, our body, like we were talking about a second ago, that's a kind of seclusion too, because we're really turned inwards. So I think that, you know, this is really the work. Even in monastic community, you have to carve out, it can be very busy in monastic life and around a lot of people. You have to carve out those times when you can really be alone. And if you're not alone physically, you're internally focused.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Thank you all so much. So just a follow-up question. I was curious if y'all had any practices that helped sustain carrying that more inwards energy into the rest of our lives. I'm working with taking refuge more intentionally with Sangha, and one of the challenges has been moving out into the rest of my life and carrying that quality into the rest of my life. So would love some wisdom on maybe some practices.
Yeah, there's a lot. Really, so much of the canon, the Buddhist scriptures, are skillful means, and the Buddha, examples of the Buddha just talking to individuals, and a lot of what we kind of learn with studying the scriptures, studying the text, is just finding what works for us. So if there's something which you already know, which moves you in that direction, kind of finding inner peace, like coming back inside, coming back to a place of balance. Say for me, there's a phrase in the Pali Canon which I've talked about before, but etang santang etang panitang yadidang sabba sankhara samato. So basically, this is peaceful, this is refined, namely the stilling of all formations. And just that much. It goes on a bit more, but each one of those words for me really just comes back. Okay, just and I think it's important. Right now, I'm attending a Mahayana university, and I'm a Theravada monk, and I really like the Theravada. I love the Pali Suttas. But one thing I've found really helpful about being in the university there is an impulse to engage with the present moment. There's a really big like escape clause, or almost like an easy way out from the Pali Canon, because there's so much like emphasis on seclusion, and someone can just use that as a means of not actually addressing their problems or addressing the hardships and difficulties that come up in daily life, but really leaning into those is really important. That's, for me, a big impulse of the Mahayana, is leaning into difficulties, leaning into the present moment. But when you lean in like that and not try to run away, you really have to have an inner sense of balance. So whatever kind of word, whatever reflection, this is peaceful. And what is this right here internally, especially if you can bring it to a place inside. If you've practiced embodied awareness or heart-based knowing, heartfulness, then coming back to the heart, this is peaceful, this is sublime, namely the stilling of all formations, the stilling, the relaxing of all kind of going out impulse. And that doesn't have to be a pulling back to leave a vacuum or based on any kind of aversion. When you pull back in a really beautiful way, what's left in that emptiness can be loving kindness. You're like stepping back to this peaceful place, but I'm not leaving a vacuum, not leaving a void, not pushing away, but there's just, this space can be filled with loving kindness and friendliness. So so I hope you can find something like that, some word or practice to come back.
Yeah, I think that was a really, really good answer. And I might only add I think that Ajahn Kovala is pointing to those words of loving kindness is really significant in, the Buddha says in a sutta, how does one live with company or with guests? And it's like when you live with greed, hatred, and delusion, those are guests. And you can live secluded if you live without those. And there's also this list of the 6 objects of veneration or respect, and it's Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, the training, heedfulness, and the 6th is receiving guests or hospitality. And I just find that list so interesting because the first 5 really lend themselves to this kind of modern get down to business ethic of like pull in and get my samadhi together. And I remember really having that at the monastery where I ordained, and then, you know, a group of 15 retreatants would show up unannounced, and the guest monk forgot to tell us, and that's your week, you know. And the Buddha really putting that 6th there of receiving guests and is so special because that's the one that really encourages you to step into that role of loving kindness and bodhicitta and giving, and where so often people kind of try to maintain their center by keeping part of their attention on their object and part of their attention on the activity. And there's a place for that. But there's this quality of loving kindness where it actually infuses the quality of attention itself. So you don't need to split your awareness as much if you're just approaching each situation with like, how can I be as loving and caring and giving as possible right now? And it's like all your heart is focused on this one moment, but it's infused with that kind of warmth of loving kindness. And usually for me, you emerge from those interactions kind of unshaken. So I think that's one really good way of maintaining some seclusion in the midst of activity personally. And I love that stepping back and leaving loving kindness. I've never heard that. I really like that.
Hi, I'm Brianna. So lovely to have you all here. I have a question about the sort of monastic lay dichotomy, and thinking about often when people talk about that dichotomy, they talk about how I've read about it has been that in monastic life you don't have children, you don't have another spouse, you don't have a lot of the things that tie people into a specific type of lifestyle. And in more modern times, it feels like those options are shifting a little bit. And so I'm wondering, how has that dichotomy shifted? And, you know, people can practice and, you know, they can live a nearly monastic life much more easily now than maybe they could at the time of the Buddha. And I think in particular, women who actually may have better options in a lot of ways going on their own. And so I just wanted to, I guess I'm not sure what the exact question is, but what is the distinction between a very monastic light-like life and a monastic life and a lay life? And is it maybe more of a spectrum?
Well, we certainly see a scale, like you're saying. You know, lay life, this whole retreat that we just taught is about making spiritual progress in lay life. And it's about the gradual path. And even in the time of the Buddha, both men and women could take the practice in lay life extremely far. In the Theravadan tradition, it's kind of like, well, arahantship happens to a lay person and then they immediately want to ordain. Unless they're like on the edge of death and then they just die. Actually, the time of death is pretty potent, so getting enlightened as you're dying is not a completely unreasonable possibility, so who knows. But anyway, the point you're making is it depends on how you set your life up. So in the monastic life, like the 3 of us live together, everybody's got the same like goal. We talk about Dhamma pretty much constantly. And when I was a lay person, so I lived a very full lay life. I didn't ordain till I was 51, and I have 2 children who are middle-aged people and 2 grandchildren and a
went through a number of relationships and jobs in high tech and all kinds of stuff. And from my experience, monastic life is just such a clear container for what I always really wanted, which was to delve deep into Dhamma, even though I didn't know what Dhamma was. I was trying to do it, find it somewhere. What is life about? What are we doing here? Who's wise? How do you find them? How do you gain wisdom? You know, and so I feel like the form is certainly the right thing for me and is a great protection and support. And other people who are attracted to monastic life become really good companions to live with. And you can create so much of what really is supportive for you in your practice in lay life, like you said. There are still going to be things that you have to handle that you'd rather not have to handle, whether you're a lay person or a monastic. And I've been around some lay women in particular who I feel like are so developed, you just kind of want to stand next to them, you know, because this is great. So I think, really seeing what really is most supportive for you. And I feel like in a lot of, you just see is this, the lay life that you can create, does it really give you the kind of container that's strong enough for you to be able to go deep into what you need to go into to make progress? And you just have to work that out. I hope that was helpful.
Not really. But yeah, I think we live in such an egalitarian society now that the dichotomy of monastic versus lay doesn't sit well with a lot of us, and I don't think we need such a strong dichotomy. Kind of like you're saying, everybody can make a lot of progress in their practice. And the Buddha didn't say everyone should ordain. And it's not like you'll see things like it's the lower life in the suttas, but it doesn't really mean that much in terms of ability to make progress. So as long as you're, like I was saying, keeping a good, strong container for yourself, really examining your mind and knowing what it needs to make progress, and having the wisdom and discernment to know what you need to do for yourself, then any kind of lifestyle is going to be beneficial. Is that enough?
I mean, you got to have the basics, keeping the precepts, having a teacher, having a community where you can get reinforced all the time in that. So
Anagarikasarana, would you talk about how you came to be wearing white, or is that going to put you on the spot way too much? Just she's all right. Okay.
You have to force me to talk. You don't have to force her to talk. It's part of my Latino heritage. Yeah, so I think this path began when I was in kindergarten. And sorry for the ayahs, they've heard this story many times.
But in Mexico, Buddhism is still pioneering, whether Theravada or Mahayana. More Mahayana, there's more places. But so I think this was around 2006, and my parents took me to a special exposition in a museum of the Buddha, and statues of the Buddha from different parts of the world. And yeah, my heart races when, I don't know. So I don't remember clearly what I saw. I remember vague things. But I remember having this feeling of, this is great, like if re-encountering a friend. And then I went the next day to kindergarten and told my friends, like, oh, I went to this exposition, it was so nice, and oh, the Buddha. And they started saying, like, no, the Buddha doesn't exist, or, bad things I don't remember so clearly. And when my mom picked me up from the kindergarten, I was kind of upset, and I was like, why were they saying that? Like, they don't know, they have not gone, things like that. And she was like, oh, it's because we are Catholic, in Mexico, most people are Catholic, and she said, we believe in God. And then I looked to the mirror of the car, and I looked up to the sky, and I said, Buddha, I believe in you. So I thought it. I didn't say it, but I thought it. So then, obviously after that, the exposition to Buddhism was kind of scarce. But when I was 19, I had the thought of renouncing and, asking myself, why do I want to follow this, marry, have kids, and work, and is there something else? Is there something more? And I didn't practice Catholicism by then anymore, and I thought it was gonna be with Buddhism, but I was not sure. And then, long story short, the pandemic hit, and I had a lot of time to research on internet, and I found Theravada, and I liked it, and I found the Ayyas, and now I'm here. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just following up briefly on both of those, the question and the really wonderful story. One thing that has come up for people, just that reminder that, the monastic life isn't in the cards for everyone, and I just know some people who've really had that split kind of get lodged in their hearts and not been able to totally resolve it, and just to say that, there really are beautiful ways to live all these lives, and really turning towards the Kamma, where you find yourself in the life where, which you find that you have, and really trusting that there's the path there waiting for you if you manage to turn towards it completely. And I know some people who really are far more monastic than most monastics I know, certainly more than me, who are in the lay life as well. So just I don't know, one small thing at the end as well.